If you want to know about photographing bears in Alaska, you're in the right place. Hello, welcome to the Photographing the West podcast. I'm Kirby Flanagan, and with me today is fellow professional wildlife and nature photographer Jeff Rich, who's just back from photographing bears in Alaska. Welcome back, Jeff.
Thanks. Good to see you again and visit with you, Kirby.
Yeah, same here. So I've been to Alaska 3 times. I think you've been there a lot more. How many trips have you made up there now?
I think my first trip to Alaska was like 1991.
Oh, wow.
And so I've been to Alaska too many times to remember. And overall, probably, when I do go to Alaska, I spend a week minimum, usually 2 weeks or more. And so this past trip was almost 3 weeks. So I'd say, getting close to 3/4 of a year of my life, I've been in Alaska. So that's a number of trips and a number of weeks worth.
Yeah. Well, lucky you. So where'd you go on this trip?
This trip was a brown bear trip. So I was keying in on brown bears, and my first stop was out of Brooks Camp in Katmai National Park. And so that was stop one. I spent 4 nights there. And then from there, I went to Silver Salmon Creek Lodge in Lake Clark National Park and spent 3 nights there. And excuse me, from there, I went to Kodiak Island and spent 3 nights in Kodiak Island. And then I'd fly from there over west over the water into like Geographic Harbor and Hallow Bay area, where I spent 3 days over there.
Nice.
Very nice. Yeah. Those are kind of, for the brown bears, those are, very, very nice spots where the bears are, a little acclimated to people, and the photography is just exceptional opportunities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to Katmai, and it was a great experience.
At Brooks Camp?
No, I just did a day trip
over to Brook and saw the fall, walked up to the falls.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, good.
So you were camped behind the electric fence, I guess?
When I went to Brooks, I did stay at Brooks Camp, which is the campground there, and they do have a electric wire fence. It's maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, and a number of strands of the electric wire, which I didn't touch to test it, so I trusted that it worked. And of course, it wouldn't keep a bear out if they really wanted to get in. And then they have little gates you can walk through. And then inside the campground is they have some little areas to set your tent, and then they have a building to keep your food in, and a building to store any gear you might have that's not living in the tent with you. And then they have little sheltered, kind of half sheltered, covered windbreak areas out of the rain to eat, and with a picnic table in there. Oh. And from there, it's about 1.5 miles, I think, hike up to the falls. And as you're walking out of the campground, you go maybe, I don't know, 1/3 to a 1/2 mile, and you're kind of in downtown Brooks, I would call it. They have a visitor center.
Right.
This is where all the airplanes and the boats show up. And then from there, the trail starts out. It goes past the Brooks Lodge, where you can actually rent a cabin, and they have meal service at the restaurant. And then another mile or so from there up to the falls.
Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty good hike, even if you fly in. And like I was on a day trip, but then we had to go through and get our safety talk, and then you walk to the falls, and then you're on the lower platform for a while and fighting the crowd there, and then you get moved up to the upper platform. And
yeah, and this year was a year I kind of tried to move everything up and kick it into gear, because this year still had some limitations on visitors.
Oh.
So the Brooks Camp only holds 60 people, and in I think it was March, when they open up the reservations online, they were only allowing 15 campers. And so I was pretty excited about, being up there without the giant crowds. And I didn't get selected. So I was a little disappointed. So I kept working on, some other things. And then they decided when COVID kind of settling down in April, May-ish, maybe, they opened it up to 15 more. And so by then I was like an expert and knew exactly how to get on the computer and get everything lined up. So I did get 4 nights at that later date. So at the end of it all, there was only half capacity at the campground. And when I got to the 2 platforms you're referencing, um, it could be crowded in the middle of the day. So 2 days, the weather wasn't good enough. Airplanes didn't even show up. So I got pretty lucky. But I did have a couple days where they were on the system where the rangers will only let,
Right.
I can't remember, 40 people, I think it is, to go out at a time. And then every half hour, but the beauty of camping, I'm there 24/7. And so the day trippers are there the middle of the day. And so I could get there 7 a.m. and then have it, with very few people until 10:30, 11 on a good weather day. And then same thing in the evening. So that
Yeah.
was really what I liked about being there at the lodge, if you go there for the lodge, or the campground.
Camping is much cheaper than the lodge, I'm sure.
Camping, I think, yeah, about $12 a night. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
The lodge has 4 twin beds, I guess. I never did go in one, but I've looked at them online, and I think it might be $800 a cabin a night or something like that. Divide by 4 if I remember right. But I'd have to look up those details.
Yeah. Pretty spendy. I know that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I did a day trip.
Right. Yeah. And so if you're interested in hearing details about the
Sure.
travel, the the flight into Anchorage, and then the flight from Anchorage, I chose to go on the Alaska Airlines jet into King Salmon.
Oh,
And
okay.
from King Salmon, you're close. So the airplane ride from King Salmon is 15, 20 minutes, I think. But I chose the water taxi, and the water taxi is about a 45-minute boat ride across the lake from King Salmon out to Brooks Camp, what I call downtown, where they do the visitor centers and the bear talk when you arrive. So that was nice. Then they dropped me off with all my gear, and I huffed it to the campsite. And then yeah, I'm on my own basically until the water taxi picked me up 4 days later.
So I assume you timed that for the salmon run, which is kind of mid-July, I think, if I remember right.
Yeah. So I was there actually. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I had a bear trip photo tour that a friend of mine and I were going to co-lead, and that got canceled in 2020. And we had that one in, it was going to be late July, early August of 2020. And so then 2021's coming around, and we're trying to make it happen. And about April, we decided, no, this isn't really probably a good idea. So we're going to delay it to 2022. But I started to see the opportunity to maybe have less people. And so I decided, once I was able to get vaccinated and feel safe with all the travel and the COVID, that I went ahead and just did it on my own. So that's kind of how it all started. And I kept the same dates because I had one client who wanted to go with me, and so he met me at the other half of the trip. So I went to Brooks by myself, and then I met up with him, which was the original timetable for our bear boat ride. A little too much information maybe, but that's kind of why I picked the last week in July for Brooks Camp. And also, when you're, online trying to pick your dates, they go fast. So I ended up being there the end of July, the last 4 days in July-ish. And like you said, mid-July is a salmon run. Well, what was interesting was this year's salmon run was later.
Oh.
In mid-July, there weren't as many salmon, but there were enough. There was plenty of bears in mid-July. I was watching the bear cam, getting all excited. And I was a little worried that maybe end of July, it starts to die off, but it was peaking. And they actually had Bristol Bay, which feeds Brooks area, had the record sockeye salmon run with 63 million salmon, most they've ever had. It was a banner year, and it drug out, into early August. So I really got lucky in all regards.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard about the Bristol Bay situation. That was pretty amazing because in other years it's been way down, I think, if I remember right.
Yeah, the really good news, because down here in the lower 48 on the west coast, the Pacific Northwest, our salmon are just taking a beating. But so that was great news for me, and another good news story that the sockeye fishery in Bristol Bay is doing well, and quite well
Oh, good.
this year. Yeah. So that was fun. And Brooks Camp has three basic areas to photograph. You had mentioned the falls platform, which everybody wants to go to, and it's fantastic. And you get the classic shot,
Right.
the salmon. And then just a couple hundred yards downstream from that is what they call the riffle, and that one doesn't have as many people, but it has a good viewing. And the bears are in the river, no waterfall, but they're fishing. All the different hunting techniques of the bears is so
Right.
fun to watch.
Right.
And then near downtown, they have the big bridge, just as you're leaving the camp uh, lodge area. They have that big long bridge, which is basically the mouth of the river.
Okay.
And so when there are bears there fishing. And so I spent some time down there just to get a little diversity. And you can get off the bridge there if it's safe to get a little down lower level.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't have time to do all that. I'd like to go back because it was a great experience. So
It's a neat place.
yes, it
And
is.
and it is one of the more affordable ways to do it. It's expensive to get there, but then once you're there, like I did for multiple days camping, then the price, per day went down.
Right. Yeah, smart way to do it. So then you moved on to Lake Clark.
Yeah, Lake Clark National Park, and one of the big photo go-to spots is at Silver Salmon Creek Lodge,
Right.
which is a great place for bear viewing. They take really good care of you. So I went from a wet sleeping bag and tent for 4 nights into a cabin, and they cook all your meals, and it's delicious food with a great chef. And then they'll take you out in 4-wheelers to where the bears are.
Okay.
And so the bears primarily, the salmon run there is later than that, a little more like early to mid-August. So they're grazing. And so at this spot, the big brown bears are eating grasses, and they
Okay.
look like cattle out in the meadow. They're just head
Yeah.
down, just chawing away, and it's tough to get, that photo where they look up, but you wait it out. And so they kind of try, work it around the meal times, and then they'll take you out in these 4-wheelers, and you have a guide, and the guide's been there, virtually all season. And so they know where the bears are, and, where they're hanging out. And I was primarily there wanting to work with uh, mothers with young, and, interaction,
Right.
action and interaction type photos. So, siblings that are working together and playing together.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of a different scene than Katmai, more of what you're describing.
Totally different scene, and it's kind of fun. Where you flew in and landed in a float plane, which is a pretty fun experience. And then here they land with wheels on the beach,
Ah, okay.
and then they shuttle all your gear in their 4-wheelers up to the cabins, and then you're basically out all day with your guide and a few other people. And this is where my friend met. So there was the two of us and another 2 people in the 4-wheeler. So we were like a group, and they took us basically wherever we wanted to go, which was the bears. But do you want this bear feeding, or do you want the siblings over there? And we stood in one area of the meadow and counted, I think, 20 bears there, which isn't as
Wow.
many as Brooks, but it's still pretty fascinating. So a whole different um, opportunity, for the bears there. And there's even some times where we're able to get them on the beach and
Oh,
out
nice.
in the waves. So something different.
Yeah. So I know silver salmon books up pretty early. So how early do you have to get a
That's a
reservation?
that's a great question, because uh, at the end of my trip, I asked David, the owner, I said, so when can I come back? Which I think a lot of photographers, when they go there, when they're ready to leave, it's like, okay, when can I come back? This place is fun. He said, well, 2022 is booked.
Wow.
So I'll put your name down for 2023. And when I was there, there was just two of us, and there were two actual photo tour groups there that each had about 6 clients. So they cater to photographers and photographer groups. So that also helps to kind of keep it booked up
Right.
year after year. For me, again, I was, kind of writing Alaska off in January, February. And so then when I started saying, okay, I'm going to pull this off, I think it was maybe Marchish, and David sent an email and said, "Hey, we have an opening for 3 nights on these dates," which was that window I was looking for, that late July, early August window. So
Right.
we took it.
Yeah.
So we got
Nice.
lucky because it
Yeah.
was booked this year, but with COVID, there were cancellations and openings and kind of last minute.
Right.
Yeah, so
Oh,
fortunate there. Had some good opportunities out there for sure. And then
yeah.
they
Well,
have the silver. Oh, excuse me. They
go
have
ahead.
the Silver Salmon Creek that's not very far from camp, and that's where the salmon run was. And there were some people fishing and not photographers, so they do offer fishing, and they did catch some fish, including salmon. And so that was the beginning. The salmon were just starting to come up. So they just started seeing a few bears in the creek, but we didn't really see bears in the creek when we were there.
So how expensive is silver salmon now?
Silver salmon, it's like 900 to 1,000 a night.
Wow.
And that includes your flight from Anchorage
Oh,
or
okay.
wherever you're flying from. I mean, I think they'd pick you up at Homer and a couple other places. So that included the flight, the round trip flight, all the meals, all 3 gourmet meals, and the guide taking you out. Basically early morning, come back for breakfast, late morning, come back for lunch, afternoon, come back for dinner, after dinner till. So we were out in the field quite a bit.
Yeah. Sounds
But
like it.
yeah, it's expensive. These places are expensive.
Yeah. Of course, their season's only about 3 months long, so they got to make it when they can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he said they kind of got it going and setting it up in April and then, start getting clients like around early May. So yeah, not a very long season.
No, not at all. And everything's got to be flown in. So
Yeah. Well, they also have a boat. They can boat things in across because they're pretty much across from Homerish,
oh,
area.
right.
Um, but yeah, they fly most everything.
So completing the bear trifecta, as it were, you went on to Kodiak. So talk about that a
Yeah.
bit.
So Kodiak Island, is famous for the Kodiak brown, grizzly bear, the biggest in the world. And I think now today's standards, there might be a little argument about that, but they still have the Kodiak bear, which is a different subspecies. So trying to get a little diversity in my trip overall, and wanted to spend a little time on the island photographing a Kodiak bear. But the highlights there are. Did I lose you, Kirby?
No, I'm still here.
Weird. Okay, well I'll keep talking. Um, so from there, uh, I was with my friend, and we would get up. We rented a car, would drive around the island. There's a number of creeks where the salmon were running, and looking for bears. And then we would take a daily flight from uh, the water float plane to Hallow Bay or Geographic Harbor, which is basically due west, and it's part of the Alaska mainland across there. And those were like what they called all day trips. So that was about $900 a day for the flight round trip. So they'd take us in, land in the water, and then would wade out of the airplane anywhere from high thigh to low chest level. You're carrying all your gear through the water, depending on the tide. A couple times we did a couple 100 yards sloshing through. So it's a little bit of a workout.
Yeah.
And then once we got up to land, we would hang out. We had a guide there, which that price included our guide. You kind of have to have a guide there, and then we would walk along the meadows and the creeks and see the bears. Now this place was fun, but um, once we got on the ground, then you're in the middle of nowhere at this point. The airplane flies away and you're there, and it was probably my highlight to be there. We were basically the only ones in this spectacularly gorgeous wilderness
Wow.
and again, this is Katmai National Park, but a whole different area. It's over the hill from Brooks, and there's a glacier in front of us and snow-capped mountains and just a slew of bears, and they were grazing and fishing in the creek depending on the tide. So we would stay there all day and get a little of both. So we were hoping to get some bears, jumping and running in the creek down at creek level to add to this, you know,
Sure.
diversity of photos. And so we had some bears fishing, jumping in the water, and then grazing. And the highlight for me, besides just the silence and the beauty of being there, was we found one mother that had 4 cubs, young of the year spring cubs, cub of the year, if you want to call it that. And that was pretty spectacular. And then we had 2 mothers that had triplets. So we had a lot of baby
Yeah.
opportunities, which is one of my favorite things. So we spent a lot of time with the babies, young of the year babies. So it was fantastic. We saw wolves out there. Weren't able to photograph, but just a spectacular setting. And then eight or so hours later, the pilot would come back and bring us a lunch dinner or a box dinner, and then would fly the hour back into Kodiak and spend the night on Kodiak Island. And then, we photographed bears on the island in between these flights. So we did that for 3 days, and that was about a little over 900, I guess, a day.
Okay. Well, expensive trip, but sounds like great fun and great photos. So we'll
Yeah.
take a look at those in just a minute or two.
Okay.
Let's talk a minute about the camera gear you used.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sounds. Can we take a break here, Kirby? I know
Sure.
you do this later. I want to get you back. I want to kind of figure out what I did and why I lost you, because it makes me feel more comfortable talking to a person than talking to my screen. So
I
what
can see
happened to
you
you?
okay.
Yeah, well, I see me too.
Ah,
Where did you go? So let's see. Zoom. There it is. There we go. Okay. Something must have clicked and popped you off it. You're back.
okay.
You want to start over with that question, or can you bleed it in with what you've already asked?
No, I can edit it. So go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah. So the equipment, part of the thing with flying around and stuff, they have weight limits.
Right.
So, you're always thinking about the weight limits. So I like to joke that, I take more camera gear than extra underwear because you got to save weight. So I did have my Nikon. I'm still shooting DSLR, so I have the D5, and my go-to wildlife lens is the 500 f4. So I have to take that everywhere I go. And then I had a D4S backup with an 80 to 200 and my zoom lens, which is a wide angle zoom 17 to 35ish. So I take everything and a camera gear, because that's what it is, a camera trip, and a zoom lens would be really nice. So I did miss a couple shots when I had the 500 on, because you can get extremely close to the bears.
Yeah.
And so I think an ideal setup for bear shooting out there would be like a zoom, out to 400, probably all you really need, 100 to 400 kind of zoom lens. If you want to go lightweight which a lot of people I saw were doing that. I was one of the few people I saw, like at Silver Salmon Creek and Katmai, where there was other people that had a prime big lens. Um, and so that zoom is probably a good way to go out there. But I had the 80 to 200 handy, so I did shoot that quite a bit. Try to get some scenics. I like to shoot wildlife scenics whenever I can, and that area is so beautiful
Yeah.
that it's a good idea to have that wider view for those. And then the other thing that, and I think it just proves my old age maybe, but I'm still using a tripod, and I was one of the few people I saw out there with a tripod. Even the tour leaders on these photo groups, they're most people are shooting mirrorless now and hand holding everything. So that's just me. It's what I've been doing since the 80s, and that 500 lens with a D5 on it weighs a lot, and so I really like still using my tripod, and so I probably always will, just because that's my style, and I like that. I like to be set up and have the lens pointed in the right direction, so that when you're waiting and waiting and waiting, which it's waiting, it's wildlife photography,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And then I'm ready to do this, and I got the shot, whereas somebody else might be waiting and then have to do this and then. So that's part of it too for me, and maybe that's an excuse. I don't know, but I still like that part of the tripod, is having that everything pointed in the right direction. You're ready to go.
Have to do what works for you.
Yep, exactly. So that's the camera gear that I use pretty much all the time. And I'm starting to look into the mirrorless stuff, so I'm sure I'll be there someday soon.
Yeah, it does save some weight, and they're definitely less bulky, and it's nice to have that live histogram.
Yeah. And the other thing I heard a lot about, including my friend that was with me, was the eye tracking focus. And so that would probably really help me too, because I'm still, on the back of the Nikon, you're kind of doing this with your thumb to move the focus sensor to where you need it to be. And so they're just, with the Sony, he was just able to look where he wanted to focus, and it was pretty amazing. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that I think would help me a lot.
Yeah, I think Sony's ahead of Nikon right now on some of those things.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Nikon's not even, well, they have the new one coming out, I guess. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see what that actually looks like. Lots of rumors, but you never know until it actually hits the
Yeah.
market.
I heard they were shooting it at the Olympics, so hopefully
Yeah.
we'll be hearing some details soon.
Yeah, it should be coming out October, November, from what I've been reading anyway.
Okay. Yeah, you're more the camera gear tech kind of expert than I am, but I'm looking forward to seeing what that one comes out doing, and we'll see if it's time to change to Sony or stick with Nikon at that point. So I'll give it a couple more months personally.
Yeah, me too. I'm tempted to switch to Sony because I do think they have it nailed right now, but got a lot of Nikon gear, so it gets pretty spendy.
Yeah, and you mentioned weight, and weight is becoming more and more of an issue for traveling, airline travel. So that is another big deal. And then carrying that stuff around all day, because I had a backpack. So my backpack I carried around all day was probably, it's probably 35 pounds plus the tripod, and I mean,
It gets,
including the tripod and the big lens and everything. So
yeah,
it's a good workout. And
yes,
in Katmai, or not, well, Katmai, but from Kodiak, like Hallow Bay, we walked probably 6, 7, 8 miles a day with all that gear.
wow,
Brooks is just mile and a half back, so it's maybe 4 miles, 5 miles a day if you do back and forth like I did. And then Geographic Harbor, which a lot of the boat photo tours will use that coastline, which is pretty spectacular. But you have to kind of know that place, because you're allowed only to stand here on this sandbar or over here. And so it's kind of nice to know what you're doing or have a guide when you're there.
right,
But we basically just went there and plunked down and stayed all day there. You're
right,
not really walking around. So that's another difference.
yeah. As you get older, that 35 pounds gets heavier and heavier.
It's it, you know, with our advancing ages, it's like, yeah, that lightweight sounds better and better.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, let me share my screen and look at some of your photos and talk about them a bit.
Sure. So at Brooks, at Katmai at Brooks Falls, and you know the bears were busy fishing. It was a great salmon run, as we talked about. And so watching the different fishing styles was a lot of fun. And you've probably all seen that classic shot of the bear up top and the fish jumping. But there was one fishing style that was kind of fun. And the bears, you can kind of tell he's standing in the whitewater there, would actually catch them with their feet and then bring them up to their mouth. So they weren't like jumping into the mouth. They would feel them kind of with their paws or see them jumping low and then grab them and bring them up to their mouth. So I like this shot because the paw and the size of the sockeye salmon, and the sockeye salmon aren't jumbo like the Chinook king salmon. They're good sized salmon, but yeah, next to that paw and that
Yeah,
little look of the eye. So this one I shot this as a horizontal, and then I chose to crop in tight because the horizontal I like a lot, but the vertical really brought me into the paw, the fish, and the eyeball. And
yeah,
so that's why I cropped this one vertical.
great shot.
Thank you. Brooks Camp, Brooks Falls.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you say, different bears have different styles. Some of them kind of snorkel and some of them chase them. Mostly the young bears seem to chase them, and the older bears are smart enough and just wait till they come to them.
And yeah, and some of them will like stand and then just dive in. So that's fun too. One thing that I noticed, which was fun for me, was being a wildlife photographer. I'm a behavior, you know, which the science of studying behavior is called ethology. So I consider myself an ethologist. So I'm always studying behavior that also helps your photography because as I'm learning, I call it learning through the lens. So you know, I know about bears, I know about brown bears, I know about salmon life cycles, being a trained you know wildlife biologist. But when you're in the field, you see these little nuances that you know nobody's going to teach you in a textbook, like you mentioned, the different feeding styles, and so then you are able to learn and anticipate and be ready for you know the right shot. And so the beauty of ethology and studying that through the lens while you're there, or even put my camera down for a few minutes and kind of watch and go, that's the shot that I'm looking for, and then put my eye back up there and just on the tripod, you can wait it out because there's no weight on your hands, and so that's kind of what I like to do that way.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, let's.
The other cool thing with behavior in Brooks, and you mentioned the young bears, I noticed a lot of mothers that had cubs out there would also the cub would be standing there watching and trying to imitate mother. So I did have some bears that were adults that would hunt at the top of the falls, and their baby was right next to him trying to do the exact same thing. Then I had some bears like you'd mentioned out jumping from the shore or jumping from a rock down onto the top of a salmon. The babies were doing the same thing. So you can tell through the generations that the mothers are teaching their young, and their young are copying their mom. So they're learning how to fish. So I think there's always going to be that diversity of fishing styles up there because I think it's learned from the
Yeah,
parent, and then if they get good at it, they probably stick with it.
sure.
So this shot, he was at the bottom of the fall, so we're still at Brooks Falls, and the negative thing about Brooks Falls is you're on this elevated platform and you're looking down, which is never my favorite angle. I like being down at eye level if possible. But you don't have a choice. So you're on the platform, you're looking down. He's under the falls, and his hunting style was to keep his body underwater and his head sticking out of the water. And he's kind of feeling around with his two front paws for sand. And this area of the river, when I was there, was loaded with sockeye. I could see fish swimming all around him. So he's like going around with his paws. He'd feel a salmon, he'd dunk his head under, and he'd try to grab it. Or he would try to grab it with his paws and bring it up to his mouth. So I noticed that this bear was doing this behavior. And then I would notice that this bear would sometimes be successful and, you know, probably more often not successful. And so the fish would get away from him, or, and I say he, I'm sorry, that's a general term. It would, you know, put its head under the water and then come up empty mouths. And then, you know, how dogs and bears like to shake. So
Right.
this one, I was trying to get the shaking of the water, which I really like action and interaction, I think I mentioned earlier. And it just was perfect timing that the fish happened to be like trying to get away from the bear as the bear shaking and he's jumping up. So I just love the unique trifecta of fish jumping, bear shaking, crazy water bear head only. So
Yeah.
that's what I was looking for on that one.
Yeah, I think you nailed that one.
Thank you.
That's a unique one. I don't think I've ever seen one quite like that before.
Yeah, very unique for sure. So that's, you know, another thing. When you're at Brooks, you're shooting a lot of what everybody else has already done with the fish jumping up and so on and so forth, which is fine. But anytime you get something unique, it's even finer or
Yeah,
better.
yeah, exactly. So do you remember what shutter speed you shot this at?
I was trying to, when I'm doing this kind of action and doing this shaking, I'm trying to do a 1600th of a second.
Okay.
So it was probably right in that ballpark. Could have been 2000th,
Okay.
but right in there to stop this kind of fast action
All right.
for sure. And 500 f4 lens. So, and then being, you know, the baby guy, I mean, that's what I was there for, as well as all the classic shots, just to get a good body of work. So to backtrack a little bit, to make the story longer, when COVID hit, March 2020, is like, oh no, now what? So I decided early on that I was going to continue to photograph by myself, camping in my truck or whatever, and staying socially distanced. So that's my excuse. That's how I socially distanced. So I took off in March and shot peregrine falcon nests. And then when May rolled around and the famous grizzly bear and Teton 399 came out with her 4 cubs, it turned into a bear year at that point. So I'm working on a program right now for a group, and it's going to be you know, COVID, a very good year. So I started in May of 2020 photographing 399, and then I don't know, I think I spent almost 3 months in the Teton Yellowstone area from June 2020 through February 2021. And I wasn't shooting bears in the winter, but anyway, it was kind of a lot of time in that area. And so the bear this summer trip 2021 I just finished was kind of going to be my culminating bear extravaganza. So now I've got my bear coverage. I'm pretty good on it. So babies, back to babies. This was actually at the lower platform, which is called the Riffle, which is a couple hundred yards downstream from the Brooks Falls. And one of the mothers that had the triplets, she would come to the edge of the river, and you know, the new cubs are very endangered of, or in danger of being killed by an adult bear and eaten. So they're very cautious. So she would come down to the edge of the river, try to get in and catch her fish, and she would tell her cubs to stay up on the shore. Well, this one mother was telling her cubs to go up the tree. And so most of the time they're going up the tree and you couldn't see them. They were behind branches and stuff. Well, this one tree, like my last day, finally they went up this one tree high enough where there was an opening. And so, you know, now I'm shooting at eye level again, or a little above eye level, and it's like, yay. And the background with the mountain in the back lined up perfect with the tree opening, and then, you know, waiting for the cub to look at you to get that eye contact.
Nice.
Thank you.
That's a pretty light Alaska brown bear.
Yeah, and of course, adults and young come in all different darknesses.
Sure.
I saw a mother and her cub, and they almost reminded me of a spirit bear. They were extremely light colored in their coloration, anyway. So that's very common to have this diversity. And this little guy even still has a little bit of his neck collar. So some young grizzlies will be born with this lighter neck collar, and some aren't, and even in the same family. So this guy has a little of that showing too.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very light. And then in the next one, you're about to click on there. So then in Lake Clark, we got to do a little more work along the beach. And so these are two subadults that were playing, play fighting, if you will. And, the dance, I kind of like the dance move
Yeah.
that they're doing.
Yeah.
And this one actually is my 500. So they were a little farther away. And so I'm incorporating kind of what I would call a wildlife scenic with the action and interaction happening within that. And so I like to, get the lines all, you notice the beach line is kind of the lower third of the frame, and the skyline is kind of the upper third. The bears are kind of towards the bottom, middle, and I like the background there with the trees. And then this one's, says, hey, coastal brown bear. That's their habitat, right? So it
Right.
shows the coastline. So this one has that double meaning to it, where it's telling the story of, yep, that's where you were, the coastal brown bear, and you were on the coast. And I saw him in the water, swimming in the ocean water right there, which isn't really open ocean. It's, that area between, um, a, south of Anchorage in that a body of water that's not open ocean, but it's still salt water.
Cook Inlet.
Thank you. They're drawing a blank there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like you say, it looks like they're dancing.
Yeah, and we stayed with them. They started out down there. We followed them, and they took their play fight up kind of behind us if we were standing there live, and behind us would be the meadow up the beach, and then you'd have this big grassy meadow with the little trees ringing around it. And they took it all the way up into that meadow. They continued to play fight. I got some really neat shots with great light. The sun came out even. This was late afternoon
Yeah.
where they're doing this play fighting in the grass with fantastic light on them. So it was probably a 20-minute, 30-minute. It was a highlight
Yeah.
experience with those two guys. And then out on Hallow Bay, Hallow Bay across from Kodiak Island. This is the mom I mentioned with the 4
Yeah.
cub of the year, Koi's cub of the years. And that was just so much fun. And she was extremely tolerant. And, I don't know what the right word to use is, but you've got to be very aware of your surroundings. The guide, is going out there every day with a group, and there was 3 of us in the group with him. And so he knew, their behaviors, and he believes that the mothers with cubs, this young particularly, will actually want to hang out near a group because he believes that the guide that it helps keep the cubs protected from the males and things, because we're there and the males aren't as
Yeah.
willing
I've
maybe.
heard that said about the bears and the Tetons too, 399. And
Yeah, I
yeah.
wouldn't trust the bears in Teton, including her. She's a little different maybe, but the bears up here, what we're looking at is a whole different thing. Do not ever get this close to a bear down there. And the only reason I'd be this close here is because, we had an expert guide, and that's what they do. That's what these bears do. They're feeding. They don't seem to care about the humans. And then we always stayed in a group.
Yeah.
Was safe.
Yeah.
I never once felt, frightened or worried, and I had them get really close. And I would never do that in the lower 48. Don't ever, think that you can say, even with 399, I don't do that.
Not by yourself for sure.
Yeah. But I love this one because it's another scenic, and I love how the big lenses compress the background and bring it right in your face, the mountains, and you can see all the cubs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another great shot.
But that's what it's like. That's what they're feeding in the grass, these big meadows, and then the creeks. I don't know if I put a creek shot in there other than Katmai, but there were some creeks that would go through these meadows where they would fish when the tide was right too.
Well, moving along.
Another one from Hallow,
Uh,
just trying to include that background and the bear with his paw up.
yeah.
Just these little every little thing you're looking for. So yeah, you want the scenic. I'm always looking, up close. I love close shots. You showed the first couple, but I love these wildlife scenic. So this one just came together perfect. And when I'm photographing, I'm always watching the background. I'm watching the foreground. I'm watching where the animal's going to go. And I try to get to where it's going to be, where it's the best background. So you can kind of see this background. I don't know if you noticed, but this kind of thing I look for. You've got the V of the line coming down with the two mountains, with the snowy mountain right in the middle of that V. And so I'm looking at that in the distance. I'm seeing the bear coming towards me because he had been walking, towards me for a while. I could see him coming, and I'm watching the background. I'm picking up the foreground. I don't want something messy in the way. There was quite a bit of driftwood and stuff. And so then I get in position and I'm photographing him, but I'm waiting for him to get through to this point. So now if you think about photos, your eyeball is kind of forced by these two mountain diagonal lines to come down right to his forehead.
Yep.
And then your eye goes straight there. It's the middle of the frame, which, we're trained, don't put everything in the middle. But here's where it kind of works. And then to get the paw up is just like an added little bonus. So every little thing that adds to it to make the photo better. So for me, it's these lines coming down. I love diagonals. The diagonals are pointing to the bear. The mountain behind the diagonals is like cool. Maybe it would have been cool if I had a zoom and could have got the top of the peak. I didn't. I had the 500. And then as the bear lifted that front paw, you have a little action and dynamics in the animal.
Right.
And he's walking into the picture still.
Yep.
So that's me, and that's what I'm looking for, and that's why I like this shot.
Great view of the claws on the left forefoot.
Anytime you can show those claws, and so they're lifting that paw up, that's a good time to click.
Yep. Yeah. Another great shot.
Thank you, Kirby.
Well, I guess we ought to think about wrapping it up.
Sounds good. I'm a talker.
No, it's all been wonderful. Let me get my notes back up. I appreciate your explaining your technique and what you were thinking when you took the shot. So being a teacher as you were comes naturally, I guess. Huh?
Yep. And I mean, I have a friend who says, "Yeah, you retired a year and a half ago. You guess the teacher can leave, but you can't take the teacher out of the teacher, but yeah. You can take what do you say? You take the teacher out of the classroom, but you can't take the teacher out of Jeff," or something like that. Yeah. It's like, yeah, I guess not. I feel bad for my wife and kids. They still are getting taught all the time.
Whether they want to or not. Huh?
Exactly.
Well, now that you've made everyone jealous, where can they find you and your photos and everything you do?
Yeah. So I have a website, www.jeffrichphoto.com, and then Instagram.
Okay.
So I'm an old school guy, but I'm trying to do Instagram. Jeff Rich Photo, just JEFFRICHPHOTO. And then I'm still doing Facebook, which you have to find me. I think it's Jeffrey Rich or something. And then the picture on my Facebook is a cover of my, I think it's my Bald Eagle book.
Okay.
And then my email is attached to my website, jrich@jeffrichphoto.com.
Yeah. That. Okay. Yeah, I'll get that down for everybody so they can find you.
I also have, 3 books. So that was another thing that, as far as how you can get a hold of me. So my newest one's the Bald Eagles in the Wild. If you haven't gotten that one yet, or be a good gift. It's a great story about our bald eagle comeback and those kinds of things. And then the complete guide to bird photography. And then my first book was Baby Birds, being a baby guy. But thanks, Kirby, for letting me give those a plug.
Well, thanks for sharing a very exciting trip with everyone, Jeff. Always nice to catch up. Each episode of Photographing the West is published on the 15th and 30th of the month. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Bye for now, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kirby. Thanks, everybody.